Chapter 15. The Guardian. Across the remains of the glaring glass lake, we jogged for what seemed like an entire age to reach the bank in which we sought safety. When both our feet touched land instead of water, the rabbit and I took a moment to catch not only our breath, but also our thoughts, as they seemed to be racing away from us. However, we did so cautiously, not knowing what else could be secretly crouched out of sight waiting to strike. This vigilance was swept up by even more astonishment Wonderhaven had to behold. Where the forest I arrived in held a familiarity, the lake held a barren beauty. This place on the shore held an alluring power. We stood on a platform of sorts, with massive chrome pillars bordering the circle. In the center of the platform stood a three-tier fountain, with each bowl decorated with green vines and red roses. On the top tier, where the waterspout was, sat a statue. It was a gorgeous piece depicting two knights on each side, sitting on their horses as they reared back on their hind legs. Behind them, almost resting on their shoulders, was a great griffin doing the same. All three figures set their stone gaze out across the lake as if preparing to fiercely attack an invisible enemy who was approaching them. Behind the fountain, up a few short stairs, were two red velvet chairs. Examining the whole area, it appeared that we were standing in an outdoor throne room. The way everything shone made it difficult to focus on a singular thing, let alone try to consider whose room this was. That was until a singular thing forcibly took my attention. Positioned comfortably on a small table between the two thrones was a domed glass case. As my eyes paralyzed themselves onto the contents of the case, I froze in both fear and disbelief. Inside the case was a flower made of crystal, a rose. Unsure of exactly what to do, with a shaky hand, I put the vorpal blade away and inched closer on unsteady legs. With each step forward, my spit turned into a lump in my throat that grew larger and larger. While my heartbeat pounded in my head, I only managed to hear the white rabbit fiddle with his monocle and rattle the chain of his pocket watch. "Thank heaven we're not too late," he said in relief. By this time I had carried myself up the few stairs and found myself with the encased flower in front of me. I couldn't do anything, not lift a finger nor a foot. All I could do was think how curious it was that the crystal rose revealed itself here before I had finished my trials. With such puzzlement not leaving me, and noticing that my ability to look away from the flower had, I found the strength to ask, "Rabbit, what is my next trial?" Much to my surprise, the voice that responded did not sound like that of a timid rabbit, but rather a stern, feminine voice. "Unsheath your weapon and drop it to your feet." The hair on the back of my neck stood up, as I felt the tip of her sword dig into the base of my brain. I quickly did as she commanded, and put my hands in the air as she questioned, "Did anyone teach you not to steal what doesn't belong to you?" I answered carefully, in no position to be caught out of line. "I'm not stealing. I have a good reason." The mystery woman's tone became sarcastic. "As you should for trying to take a legendary weapon out from under my nose. Tell me, what is your name, thief?" It was apparent that I wasn't being heard, which frustrated me. "I'm no thief. My name is Alan Little, and I'm here on behalf of the White Queen," I snapped. She found this humorous. "The White Queen, you say? Now that is a very convincing reason. But why should I believe it?" This time the White Rabbit fielded the question as he stepped forward and adjusted his monocle. "Because it's the truth. Wonderland is in need of the rose. The Queen sent him to retrieve it." The rabbit's distraction allowed me to turn around and catch a glimpse of the mystery woman who held me at bay. Standing at about my height, the reflection of her armor not only put mine to shame, but was also only rivaled by the glow of her intense hazel eyes. As blinding as she was in Wonderhaven's undying light, she was equally as intimidating. Each piece of armor she wore was divided into two colors. The right side of her helmet and body were red, while the other side was shiny silver. It was a complex design. The helmet she wore covered her whole face and had feathery wing-like protrusions on both sides. The silver side of her face had delicate gold line work and a gold wing. The red side matched in every way with black as its second color. Out of the back of her helmet was a long red tassel that reached the middle of her back. The breastplate she wore depicted a golden griffin on the silver side fighting a black Jabberwocky on the red side, with a white rose in the middle. She also wore a red gauntlet on the left side and a black gauntlet on the right, and matching shin guards. The sword she used made the vorpal blade look like a kitchen knife, and although she wielded it with one hand, I could tell it was actually a two-handed weapon. It was a uniquely crafted blade, being made of glass instead of steel. It looked fragile but deadly, as it was accented with gold. The hilt was black with 4 jewels on the guard, 3 red ones and a white one in the middle. From head to toe, she represented the struggle between good and evil that we all currently faced, as well as the family who was at its helm. By the time I concluded my assessment, the woman had lowered her sword from my neck, and I moved over a bit to face her. The conversation with the rabbit had apparently done the trick, because her whole mood had changed. "So, Alan, fetcher of the Queen, am I correct in assuming that I am to be your second trial?" "It would appear so," I responded confidently. "Let's have it then," boasted the woman as she kicked my sword over to me. My hand shook and my body tightened as I picked it up off the ground. As much as I didn't want to cross blades with this warrior, I knew everything rested on me accepting the duel. Our clash started off slow, meticulous, if you will. It was a dance. Each strike was met with a parry, and each parry was met with a dodge. It was all about defending against one another's strengths and exposing our weaknesses. This feeling out process continued until my opponent was satisfied with my capabilities. Then her attacks grew quicker and harsher, while she began using sweeping moves with her sword across the area around her. My focus changed from swordplay to my movement. Eventually, I decided that the best thing to do was to create space between us. With the first chance I got, I ran past the fountain and stopped on the outer edge of the platform. The knight was quick to close the gap, but instead of tailing me in my path, she displayed her agility by jumping over the fountain. Well, to be more exact, she treated each bull like a step, barely touching them before leaping over the statue at the top. She came down in slow motion, with her blade raised high over her head. She struck with so much force, it dropped me to one knee. As we both jockeyed for the upper hand, the knight commented, "She has taught you well." With a grunt, just before forcing her off me and moving out of the way, I replied, "I'm a quick learner." We separated and paced, locking eyes as we waited for the other to make the next move. In the blink of an eye, the fighting continued in a flurry of attack and defense. Matching each other step for step, we pushed the fight unknowingly to the middle of the lake. Reaching a stalemate again, the knight ended the volley by putting quite a fair amount of distance between us, chuckling as she did so. I noticed at this point, this whole thing had gone from a fight to a competition. It was a game of hitting each other as hard as we could in the hopes of one-upping the other. The first move belonged to the knight. "I must admit you impressed me," she called out, "but this is where your true trial begins." Unsure what she planned to do, I watched in intrigued horror as she began spinning her sword around at her sides. The tip of her sword, just ever so slightly, made contact with the glass water, and on the upward rotation, it sent broken shards of glass hurling toward me. My eyes grew wide, not only at the fact that she was doing this in of itself, but also the speed at which it was done. It would have been bad enough to be bombarded with any number of glass shards, but the hundreds that she was able to send flying was an unbelievable sight. Whatever I chose to do, I knew I'd have to act quickly, so, at the first opportunity, I took off running toward the knight. In full sprint, shards went whizzing past me. Being able to deflect some with my sword and dodge some more, I came out relatively clean, except for one shard that lodged itself deep into my shoulder. The pain was searing as I tried to stay on my feet and moving. With a deep breath, some cries of pain, I was able to pull the glass out, and in an attempt to throw her off balance, I threw it at the knight. Wonderhaven was truly filled with many inconceivable things, because by the time the glass reached her, it dissolved into water, which she sliced cleanly through as it failed to even graze her. With the backswing, she aimed to strike me. I responded to this by sliding underneath the blade, my face inches from disaster. I came out behind her and quickly rose back to my feet, ready to fight. Again we stood across from each other, examining, waiting for the next round. Somehow it was as if the knight's body language had changed. Where she had begun the fight, assuming that she likely had the upper hand, she now stood as though she realized that we were more evenly matched than she anticipated. I had been played with before and was now to be taken seriously. I could read in her eyes that she had a smirk hidden under her helmet, which frustrated me beyond words. It felt as though nothing I did could stagger her. I know it was foolish of me to let emotion overcome me in a battle like this, but I can't deny that it did. So much so, in fact, that for the first time I was the first to attack. Lunging forward, I swung my blade with malicious intent. Little did I know that my rage had ultimately left me vulnerable. The knight just maneuvered around my strikes and waited for the right time to punish my mistake. When the time came, she simply sidestepped my sword and countered by firmly kneeing me in the sternum. After this took me to my knees, she jammed the hilt of her sword into my wounded shoulder. As I was booted to the ground, I let out a deafening cry. On my hands and knees before the knight, like a wounded dog, I was slow to make it back to my feet. This blatant refusal to stay down seemed to shock and impress her enough to display her power further. As we locked eyes again and I steadied myself for the next blow, she just stood in place and began twirling her weapon all around her. This confused me greatly, since I wasn't able to see what was happening around us at first. The faster she twirled her sword, the more wind she generated. As the wind picked up, it caused the lake to start moving in a circle. Soon, the glass water began to churn violently around us until a funnel started to form. A glass tornado soon separated the two of us from the rest of the world. The sword kept spinning as the wind roared from inside the eye of the storm. She continued until it gathered such strength that the sheet of lake that we stood on was torn from its place and spiraled high into the air. Only then did she stop, and I realized that this tornado was to be our arena. Reflections of us paraded around on huge chunks of glass that encircled us. I felt as though we were about to commence battle from inside a looking glass. The wind howled and made us both unsteady on our feet, but still we found each other and crossed blades. The sword-on-sword clang and grunts of struggle served as the verse and the chorus to the tornado's melody. Around and around we went for quite some time before I found a small opening in the knight's defenses. I was able to cut her knee, which left her open for another cut along her cheek before she blocked me. Fatigue was beginning to seep into both our beings, though it was clear that a victory would only come when resiliency failed. We both were starting to show metaphorical cracks in our technique, similar to how the glass slab we were standing on began to show physical cracks. The wind blew from inside the tornado with such force that when it pushed against the slab, it began to crack from the pressure. The knight and I were quick to choose sides as the platform split in two. We both backed away from our respective edges as it splintered off and became part of the tornado. From there, we both had the same idea. The only option left to execute as the ground we stood on slowly evaporated. Before time was up, we were to jump and clash once more in the air. Time slowed down as we left the ground. Just when we did, the ground had completely disappeared. There was only time for one attack, and because I got the higher jump, I won the draw. As I raised the vorpal blade high above my head, the knight prepared herself as best she could in midair. She was able to block my attack, but the fight had reached its unavoidable end. My strike came down with such force that when she blocked with her sword, it shattered on impact. We hovered in the air, suspended in disbelief. just for a second, before an explosion of force abruptly ejected us from the tornado. We were thrown through the wall of glass that made up the funnel and sent hurling to the ground. While the funnel dissipated, the knight was rocketed toward the shore, bouncing off the ground a fair distance. Her body left a trail of disturbed glass as she slid and came to rest on the ground in front of the fountain. I, on the other hand, was pushed further out onto the lake. I crash-landed and was enveloped by the glass. Thinking about it now, the whole ordeal must have been horrifying to watch from the White Rabbit's perspective. To see a tornado rise from the lake and watch both combatants be sent flying to the ground below. To see the mystery woman begin to stir while seeing no sign of me as the lake started to calm and return to absolute stillness. I can imagine his anxiousness. I couldn't even begin to explain what it was like floating beneath the lake's surface, but I'll always remember the sound of my fist punching through it. It was like pulling myself out of a broken window. After a jagged ascent, I made it back to the surface with my downed opponent in sight. Bruised, cut, and staggering, it was a long but dedicated walk back to the shore. With my sword at my side, I marched, focused only on finishing my business with the knight. As I approached her, she was dragging herself along the ground, frantically trying to get away. I stepped over her, just to stop in front of her and face the opposite way. I stood there, looking at the wound in my shoulder and the blade in my hand. As she struggled to her knees, it amazed me just how much we took out of each other. Two proud warriors stood as equals in battle, and now we were here. I tightened my grip on the vorpal blade and said, "This trial is over," before spinning around, intent on execution. Before it touched her, the knight called out, "Alan, wait. Just wait, please," she pleaded as she took off her helmet. In a matter of seconds, she went from a very capable guardian to an ordinary girl. About my age, she was beautiful with long brown hair with blonde highlights. Her innocent face was laden with unsightly scars, one old over her left eye, and the fresh cut I had given her in the fight on her cheek of the same side. As her hazel eyes sparkled at me in defeat, there was no doubt who this mystery woman was. I dropped my sword on the ground beside me as I forced stuttered speech. No, it's impossible. You can't be. Alice." A lump formed in my throat as I stumbled over my next words. Do you know who I am?" A small smile showed as Alice replied, "I knew who you were the second I saw you." As I helped her to her feet and wrapped her in a hug, she continued, "Oh, my nephew, you look so grown and remind me so much of your parents. How are they?" I answered while treading carefully, They died. Father went in his sleep unexpectedly, and Mother committed suicide not too long after I was committed to the asylum." "Asylum?" she gasped, her voice filling with regret. "I'm so sorry, my dear. I wouldn't have wished my life, my curse on anyone. If you're here, you no doubt found my journals, somehow. And the asylum means that you tried to tell someone, just like me." It's a dreadful life, nephew. I was quick to console her woes. It isn't dreadful at all. It is unique. Belief in imagination is something not everyone is strong enough to possess. Don't you see? Who we are in Wonderland is who we are meant to be. Whether we are believed by people who can't see it or not, our fate will be forever intertwined with Wonderland. My words caught Alice by surprise, as I could tell she wasn't sure how to respond. Where did you learn that? From my father, in a letter that he attached to your journals. He believed in you, in Wonderland, and so do I. I could tell that learning of my father's support meant a lot to her. But where I would have expected her to respond, I heard an odd yet familiar voice, spoken like a true leader. Confused and perhaps a little startled, we followed the voice with our eyes to one of the giant chrome pillars. I never in my lifetime would have expected the source of the voice to be who it was. Leaning carelessly against the pillar was an old friend in a white top hat and overcoat. "Hatter!" I exclaimed, as I ran to him with a hug. "It's here, it's all here, magnificent, just like you described." "Yes, it's all very beautiful," replied Hatter with a devilish grin, but it isn't all exactly as I put it." While we waited to see what he meant, Hatter looked down at the teacup he held in his hand with fake concern. It's quite impossible to fill a teacup that never empties. We took a brief moment to enjoy Hatter's playfulness before a real, troubling question came into my mind. "How exactly are you here, Hatter? I thought you were dead." Hatter's expression turned troubled as he began running his free hand all over his body, as if clarifying he was standing there. "Why, I believe I am, Alan, being Jabberwocky dinner and such." I failed to wrap my head around the situation, as I erupted into a panic. But how? This was yet another response that was to be given by a voice outside the conversation. This time it was the White Rabbit who answered, as he came hopping up and put his monocle in his pocket. "We all are. It's the unfortunate truth of Wonderhaven. Everyone here has passed from a different life, from another time." "Everyone? Even you, Rabbit?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "That mark around your neck, is that—" I started to inquire with curiosity before being interrupted. "This ghastly thing? Yes. Well," he answered before clearing his throat and proceeding to remove his head from his body. His arm now suspending his head over his body by the ears, he went on. "I once served as an advisor to the king and queen before the Red Queen captured me and had me executed for a crime she called treason to the true ruler of Wonderland. Now here I am, like the rest, in service to the Crystal Rose." When he finished his tale, thankfully the rabbit placed his head back in its proper place and was a whole rabbit again. It all was too much to take in. It's a very curious thing to meet a talking rabbit in itself, but more so when it can remove its head from its shoulders and carry on as if perfectly natural. It all was made easier, however, by the company I kept. The four of us managed to carry on a manner of conversation for quite some time before we were distracted by a sudden noise. The flower in the glass case on the table between the thrones had come to life. The case began to rattle, and the rose and the crystal rose inside began to blacken as its petals withered and turned to ash. I alone felt a sudden urgency to take action as I watched the key to Wonderland's survival disappear. I heard the rabbit open his watch and say, right on time. As I took a step toward the table, right on time as I took a step toward the table. Before I could get far, though, Alice stopped me dead and yanked me to one knee. "That's not the real crystal rose," she said sternly. I must have been the only one who didn't know what was going on, because as I looked around, the rabbit and Hatter were also on one knee with head bowed. It was clear we were waiting for someone to appear on the thrones. But who? Maybe royalty. I'm going to cut this video here, guys. I know it's only one chapter, which kind of sucks, but my filming schedule is a little bit dicey with the holiday being just around the corner, and these are pretty hearty, significant chapters. And as you can tell, by the time we're already over half an hour in. So I'm going to cut it here, and until next time, guys, we'll see you later.